Set phasers to celebrate. We're marking the 60th anniversary of the original Star Trek, the show that launched the Enterprise into television history. This groundbreaking series didn't just entertain audiences, it helped shape science fiction, pop culture, and generations of fans who still believe in exploring strange new worlds. Lieutenant Mitchell, laying a course for season 1.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. If you remember when your VCR clock blinked 12 o'clock for 6 straight months, then this is the show for you, and you should probably go into the living room and fix that, because if it's been for 6 months, it's probably been going longer than that. Go fix your VCR, hit pause, come back, and we'll be here.
Are you saying that we didn't know how to do that back in the day? We didn't know how to fix our VCRs or what?
No.
Or,
yeah,
or
if there was
our
a power
parents,
surge
okay,
and you woke up and it was like blinking, it's like, okay, and now I gotta do this again. But you had to do it because
otherwise it was 12 o'clock for a while.
Well, and you weren't going to record something that was on at a certain time. Like you know, it wasn't
That's
like DVR cloud where you just say what you want. You had to physically make that happen in your living room. You were programming it, right? You were capturing it.
That you are correct, sir. You are correct, sir. I'm stepping into Ed McMahon mode here.
Yes. You couldn't just go to your menu and push, give me Yellowstone. You had to find out what time. And then, God forbid, there was a sporting event.
Oh, God, yeah.
That ran late.
The kids today don't know what we went through.
And you got the last inning of the Yankee game, but then you wanted,
and try having two VCRs, hooking them up to tape movies that you rented from the local video store, little pirating there like we did, and we had quite the collection.
We had to figure this stuff out. We had to figure out workarounds to get to these things. So if you're one of those people, welcome aboard. If you're not, you kind of want to hear about that stuff, that this is the right place as well. We welcome you aboard for a very special series of episodes. 1966 was the launch of Star Trek. We're in 2026, and we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of Star Trek. We're going to do it in a very special way. Today, we're going to walk through our picks, our highlights of season 1. We're going to give you a little brief overview, just some quick picks about what we liked about the first season. Then we're going to get in the Galileo. We're going to shuttle over to Nick's channel on YouTube, and we're going to do season 2 there. And we'll do the same type of thing, same type of format, and give you season 2. And then we're all going to jump back in again one more time, come back over here later in the year for season 3. So this is going to be a 3-part celebration, because that's the only way to really do it. Epic.
Yeah. This is going to be epic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
And with that, we have our guest.
Let's let him wait. Let's let him onto the bridge.
Yep, there he is.
Permission to come aboard, Captain.
Yeah,
he is
permission
aboard.
Granted. You are here. It's such a great, it's great having you here, because we know how much of a Trek fan you are, fellow Trekkie, not Trekker, but Trekkie. And
I'll take either description. Yeah.
Well, Trekkie is the correct term, I think.
Yes, good.
So there
I always call it Trekkie as well.
Yeah. So that's, Dean and I, of course, are OG. We are, well, I'm going to say it. I don't know if Dean will admit to this, but we are also celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. So
I have no comment.
It's a little special. It's
Eric was right. I have nothing to say about that. How dare you, sir?
How dare you?
No, but it's an absolute pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And like we were mentioning, the second part of this will be on your City of Kick podcast, on the YouTube channel, with your greatest pop cultural characters.
There's a lot of characters to talk about as we look at those best episodes of season 2. And here we are talking about season 1, probably one of the best seasons of any science fiction show, of any TV show, right? I would say this broke the mold. A lot of people maybe discovering science fiction for the first time when they saw the show. So it really was a trendsetter. And who knew that it would launch a franchise, right?
Yeah, it would launch more than that, right? It would launch so much, a cartoon, conventions. There's so, that's why you talk about, in the open, pop culture.
Yeah.
Just getting into the zeitgeist of culture, right?
I dare say this was
words
one of
from
the
Star Trek becoming a part of the lexicon.
Yeah, one of the pioneers of pop culture. Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and who knew? Yep. So what we're going to do before we get into it, the first season had 29 episodes. So what we decided to do is we're going to break this episode up into 3 chunks. So each one of us are going to pick 2 episodes from the first 10 episodes that we think are emblematic for us of what we love about Star Trek. Then we'll jump into the next 10, so it'll be 11 through 20. And do the same thing. And then 21 through 29, we'll do the same thing. And then at the very end, we're just going to pick one of those 6 that we picked that we think would be good for somebody who's not into Star Trek. Because there are plenty of people that still, look at it a certain way as campy and childish or overacty. And there are definitely those elements to it, but it certainly is not. That's what makes for good TikTok clips or YouTube shorts, Right. There is so much more to it, and there is a lot that this show had to say and did say and got away with, because in sci-fi you can get away with things on TV that you couldn't do in Bonanza, but you can cover the same subject material, but putting it with an alien. You can then do it. Then opens things up. So
a lot of social commentary happening at the time, and sci-fi allows for those allegories to shine through. And you can't outright say things back in the day, but it was so it was clever, poignant. The only other show that I think did it really well, and maybe perhaps even better, was Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Rod Serling was an absolute genius, but here Roddenberry wanted that kind of quality. I think, going in, I think he's initially wanted it to be sort of wagon train to the stars, more actiony, but I think he saw the potential of actually, wow, we could, this is about human beings, reaching that potential and just sort of being out there and dealing with other, the same kind of problems, but out there in space, so it, was a very interesting idea.
Yeah, so, and Roddenberry was a TV man. He wrote and produced a lot of TV shows through, in the late 50s, early 60s. I mean, that was like fertile ground because television was a new format. So there was just all kinds of different TV shows, and Roddenberry had a hand and worked with Shatner and Nimoy previously, and just kind of, then had this idea, like Eric said, let's do just some stats about Star Trek. Then we'll talk about the little prehistory. Then we'll get into our episodes. The first episode proper of what we know as Star Trek the series aired on September 8th, 1966. So this will make it 60 years old. But the prehistory goes back as even to 1964 is when the first pilot was attempted. An episode called The Cage with Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Pike, and he was kind of the first. This was the first. If you watch that, you really get the first blush look, right, Nick, at really what the framework of Star Trek was. They replaced pretty much all the players except for Nimoy, but the framework of what Star Trek was still solidly there. It wasn't like they made this, even though this pilot got passed on, they didn't make a lot of substantial changes. There was still those, like Eric said, this was about man, that episode was about a man kind of being trapped and put in a cage in like a human zoo. And what does it mean to be an individual and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Some really great science fiction premise for it. And it had this very future retro look. That sounds contradictory, but it was really, you could see he was inspired by like the 1950s science fiction aesthetic of like, this planet Earth and things like this island Earth, things like those kinds of movies from the 50s. And they thought it was too cerebral. And they said, no, I don't get it, because it was a very thought-provoking science fiction-y thing. And there was a lot, you had a female first officer and things like that. You look at the crew and it was a trend-setting kind of experiment where you had people of different races and, genders, and now we take it for granted when we see that. But back then you could imagine the shock of seeing, this melting pot on the bridge working together, and that was
alien.
something that he wanted. Yeah,
and Leonard Nimoy as Spock. So they Roddenberry had this idealized vision of the future where most of the problems that the Earth has seen had been solved in one way or another, or things were certainly more harmonious. A lot of those hurdles that were real things in the 60s, this was imagining that we had surpassed that. We had overcome it as a species and now branched out into space, bringing that same message, right? And exploration and meeting new aliens or exploring new worlds. Well, like Nick said, they got passed on, as great of an actor as Jeffrey Hunter is, who I really like. He's a really great actor.
Yeah.
It just didn't work. But Roddenberry didn't give up. He was still pressing it. And oddly enough, Lucille Ball fits very strongly into the history of Star Trek. She's known as the godmother of Star Trek because Desilu Productions, that was her studio, agreed to finance a second pilot, which never happens. You never really get a second crack at it. Usually they just throw it away and you move on to the next one. So they did. They really reconfigured it. Kept Leonard Nimoy as Spock. Majel Barrett, who played number one in the second in command in the pilot, was now going to be Nurse Chapel. But then everything else after that was totally redone. William Shatner, Shakespearean Canadian actor. He'd done two really important Twilight Zone episodes. Two of the probably one of the best known ones, Eric. Right? So he's a veteran of television, as was Nimoy. They were all doing these guest spots on all these different shows.
That's right. And I dare say that even, with the new iteration, you even like Nick was saying, you had an even more diverse crew. For the first time, you see a Black woman sitting at communications, an Asian at the helm. You have eventually a Russian navigator would come, in the second season,
and a Scottish transport captain.
That's right. That's right.
Engineer.
Yeah.
So they really did. They really did kind of scour the globe.
Yeah.
And
it seemed like every episode that first season, you've got like a Frenchman and it's just like a Polish guy. And
right.
It's like it's a melting pot. It's not just Smith and Jones and,
But the wonderful thing it was that it was just rolled out so naturally. It was just there. It was like these characters were there.
Yeah.
They didn't put them on like under the microscope. There was no spotlight. I mean, everybody just working together, solving problems, doing their jobs.
Yeah. This is what it was. This is how things
were. What got me as a fan was what's so fascinating is just simply watching them do what they do for the first part, and then you get into these situations where they might have to do a little bit more to solve the problem, or things happen. But just seeing these people working, it was so engaging, and they gave their all the actors. Yeah. You got to give credit to everyone involved.
And that's something that the show, before we get into the second pilot they shot, you bring up a great point, Eric, because it would continue throughout the series, where there was constantly meetings of all the department heads. They would either meet on the bridge, or they'd meet in the meeting room, and they'd all be sitting around giving their opinion, right? Because Kirk would call a meeting. Well, what are we going to do about this alien? What are we going to do about this virus? Mm-hmm. And they would all kind of be in the room, and if life sciences was involved, they would get their opportunity to say something. So it really was that matter of factly, not explained. It's just like, here's the future. Welcome to it.
Yeah.
Here's how things are. We don't need to explain that this is the way it is. Here it is. You're going to, it's not anything weird or out of the ordinary. So we're not going to treat the future like that.
Eventually you would get to know what Starfleet represents, and the Federation, and it would come later. But the fact we didn't quite know what Starfleet was it militaristic? Was it this, but the fact that that you even had such a situation where the captain of the ship is asking for advice, and every department head had that say. Yeah. And it was important. Everybody had, was able to speak up. There was not just, the captain giving all the orders, and it wasn't that regimented and that rigid. it was an opportunity for the best of the best to, of minds to come together and solve the problem.
Yeah, he would be consulting.
Yep.
All the anybody that's relevant, and if the episode called for a historian, that person would suddenly show up. And,
that's
the great thing about having a crew of 400, 500 people.
There you go.
Like week to week. Oh, we need some. We need to kill somebody off. We don't want to kill off one of the leads. Let's just throw a face we haven't seen yet.
Librarian, go. Whoever's down in the archives. We're doing an episode about going in the past, so it's a great thing. So they did get a green light for a second pilot, which they did film, which was called Where No Man Has Gone Before, which was the second pilot. It ended up being episode 3 in the series. It actually was not the premiere episode, which was kind of strange because you could tell the production values, costuming was different, but that would be a through line with Star Trek because of production costs. Episodes were shot in a certain order, but not aired in the same order. So sometimes there's some weird continuity. Like McCoy, his first appearance isn't actually until episode 7, but he's in the Man Trap. He's already there, but that really wasn't his first appearance in the continuity in the shooting of it. So it's really,
and then they reference certain things. And if you watch it chronologically, it makes more sense. But if you watch it, it's just
it's jarring to see
Chapel was already on the
it's jarring to see that in that particular episode that there are some of the people are there. Sulu is there, Scotty is there, but they're not necessarily in the positions that they would end up being in.
Sulu was
he's a mathematician.
He was a mathematician, but he was in the play.
They retconned it later, but exactly. They were still kind of feeling the ropes.
And McCoy was not the doctor at that point. It was a different doctor.
Piper.
So
once they kind of
trial and error.
They quickly felt their way through it.
Yep.
Which was good. So let's get into it. Because there are things we'll kind of hit on the way. I'm sure there's some characters that pass through that we'll get to and mention. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're going to kind of talk about 2 episodes, each one of us, just quickly what they mean to us, and if there's any connection. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes there is. So I'll just kind of kick it off.
Okay.
And my 2, the 2 episodes I picked from the first 10 are of the earliest ones, which is Charlie X and Where No Man Has Gone Before, which was the first pilot. And I look at Where No Man Has Gone Before as episode 1, even though it is not episode 1 for me. Right. It really is, because it's just, and both of these episodes, Charlie X and Where No Man Has Gone Before, what they both have and what most of the early Trek episodes have in common is more of sci-fi horror aspects to things, and putting the characters in these, the characters weren't as well defined yet. So this is almost like testing the characters by putting them into situations where they're dealing with external forces, and not like those bottle episodes that would later come, even later on in the season, where they were comfortable and could just rely on the characters to drive the story. A lot of this early stuff, Charlie X, is about a kid who's adopted by aliens. He's out of control. He just does what he wants, killing people. Just really has. So it really is horror. Some of it's body horror in there.
Very much.
And then Where No Man Has Gone Before is the same thing. A guy quickly has heightened DSP powers. They go to the edge of the universe. He gets even heightened, and he crashes out. Probably one of the quickest crash outs in sci-fi history, going from like a really cool guy to like godlike ambitions, like really fast. It really corrupted the guy. But they're 2 great early examples for me of taking the a sci-fi anthology style of writing, and then kind of plopping the characters in and trying to fit them in, and then figuring out what the quirks, what the relationships are, what the personalities are between them. So you guys have anything to add about those?
I mean, I think Roddenberry decided very early on, I think, to actually hire sci-fi writers that were established, that had written stories, short stories, perhaps even novels. So yes, those few batch of episodes, like that first 10, definitely had that more sort of general sci-fi aspect to it. It wasn't exactly, not necessarily hard sci-fi, but good sci-fi stories where you could apply this to perhaps any character, could be dealing with these situations, and not necessarily we're not getting to the characters just yet here.
Yeah,
we're telling
specific to them.
We're telling stories that are just out there just to get the show going up and running, I feel, right? I mean, it was more like you say, Dean, some horror aspects, some like real heady ideas, things like that. And yeah, I mean, and I think it was a really good move, a brilliant thing for him to do. So, Nick, did you have anything?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Where No Man Has Gone Before is one of my favorites of all time. They nailed it. This is, I can't imagine them saying no to this pilot, because it had action, charismatic actors, just a great story. I mean, and what I loved about those early episodes is how they just do this world building. So you already hear about Kirk's, Starfleet Academy days and the relationship between Mitchell and Kirk. First time we're seeing them, but you feel the bond that they have. So that final battle between them has, power, because it's like, these are friends, and this power is really corrupting his friend. And now he has to abandon him on this planet, and then in Charlie X, just, seeing someone like Yeoman Rand, who at those first few episodes, she was really a really big character. And, they kind of wrote her out later in the season and replaced her with other kind of interchangeable yeomen every time they needed a yeoman in there. And there's various reasons for why they did that. But she played a great role in that first, a couple of those episodes. But Charlie X, for sure, you see Charlie kind of falling in love with her, and a lot of the things he does. You talked about body horror. It still haunts me to this day when he just makes that poor woman in the hallway.
Yeah, her face
is gone.
Yeah,
I mean, just like as a kid seeing that, I was holy cow.
It was freaky. It was,
like I said, it kind of had almost like an Outer Limits feel to it.
Right.
Outer Limits would kind of go to that really creepy stuff.
Creature of the week kind of thing.
And that's what the early stuff had. And the lighting was different on those earlier episodes. It was more shadowy.
Yeah.
They really would dim the bridge and then have key lights that would highlight. So it had a certain look. And then as the season progressed, it would certainly kind of brighten up a little bit more again, as they kind of felt what the aesthetic should be. Less maybe creepy, less foreboding. The ship felt foreboding because of the way it was lit.
It was lit with the close-ups, the sort of those camera, like sort of almost Twilight Zone-esque kind of like certain episodes where there, you get those weird effects kind of thing, and it was very effective though, very effective in the storytelling. I feel
very theatrical in many ways.
For those kind of stories, it needed that, like with Gary Mitchell. In the beginning, after the whole accident happens and Kirk turns him over and he looks up and his eyes are silver and it like zooms in and freeze frames on
just the eyes. And then the picture fades out, but the eyes remain. Like,
I love that.
Classic sci-fi TV thing. So,
right.
So those are my two picks. It's kind of a horror anthology arc.
Yeah.
That they had going on, and if you go and dive into some of the other episodes, you'll see that there are other episodes that match it. So, Nick, what did you have for your two?
I mean, that first season, the first part of the first season was so good too. I picked "What Are Little Girls Made Of," which was written by Robert Bloch, horror writer. So that's the one that had like Ted Cassidy as Ruck, right? The big android, and Dr. Corby, Roger Corby. So it introduces, even though I think we saw her in a different episode too, Christine Chappell, the nurse. And this was like her fiance back in the day, and she's coming back to see him, Roger Corby. And we learned that Kirk had learned about him in the academy, and he's on this planet and building androids. And we see Andrea and others. And that it's one of those episodes where they turn Kirk into, they make another clone of him, right? And it's just science fiction elements, but horror elements. As a kid, I was scared out of my pants, man. I was just like, it was so good. And And then the other one I picked was Dagger of the Mind, which lesser known episode, but had some great character actors in there. You know, you got James Gregory playing Dr. Adams. So it's another one where Kirk kind of knew about him, studied him, and he's got this great theory about, you know, rehabilitating, you know, the criminally insane. And his, you know, so they go down on this colony, and you learn a little bit backstory about Kirk, where he's been on these penal colonies before. And, you know, you're introduced to this villain right away. Morgan Woodward is the actor who plays Dr. Van Gelder, who, you know, has been experimented on. And then you realize there's the twist where he's not the bad guy. Like he was being this new technology was used, and then they used it on Kirk. And then there's that other Dr. Noel who's kind of has this thing for Kirk, and you start hearing all this, you know, womanizing thing about Kirk too. Like you see episode to episode, and they make him fall in love with her, like using that technology, and it's just like all this subtext and sub stories, and I just loved it. So those are two examples that kind of show the diversity of the kind of storytelling that Star Trek would do, you know, for 3 seasons.
Yeah. And you know, I think the What Are Little Girls Made Of is very timely in the age of AI. You know, Christine, it's me, Roger. I'm still the same. You know, like
he's holding his hand, and it's like just,
but it's creepy. You know, because it's
very creepy.
Literally about someone putting their essence into a synthetic body and thereby living forever, right? And that is no more prescient than now. With what does it mean to have artificial intelligence? What does it do? How does it? What parts of us does it replace, or is it? So the fact that back then it was kind of like a thing, not just making a robot, but transferring your essence, right? And your what makes you, and that's really what the episode ended up being about. Is what makes is a person what's inside, and you could be surrounded by wires and circuits, or is it the whole thing? So it was really
it's like we watch Blade Runner now, and it's like
Blade Runner.
They did it first. Can androids love, right? I mean, it's like
right. Kirk tries to, you know, he's telling Andrea, like, you know, his emotion is just foreign to her. She's not quite there yet, but you know, but she does experience it. You know, there is a sort of a revelation there. You know, I love. Well, that's the age old thing. Ever since Frankenstein, we got Frankenstein, Pinocchio, all of these stories about the little wooden boy wanting to be a real boy, and you know, reanimating matter and all this kind of thing. You know, this dates back to that, but it's like, but yeah, it's just, I love that particular topic. Yeah. So it is a great episode in that regard. So,
Yeah. What was this? Dagger of the Mind. Yeah. It's just, that's more of like it's more of a psychological episode. You know, it's kind of him unraveling a mystery.
So sociological too. Like, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's where they start to get into writing for them, kind of like now, you know, Kirk needs to go down there and investigate what's happening. There's a crazy man on the ship. Is it, you know, he is crazy, but why is he crazy? You know, it's more not what's happening, but why, what happened and how, and go down and check it out. So those are.
This was something in the 60s that wasn't quite a thing yet, right? Trying to understand the criminal mind or the you know, the mentally ill or the insane, you know, insanity. So this was one of those social topics that, you know, predated, you know, eventually that would become a thing through investigation and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you know, great, just great commentary there, you know. So
that's the great thing about Star Trek is the, you know, a red shirt is usually going to get killed if they beam down. You know, there are certain tropes that are true about Star Trek. Yeah. But you got to push that aside, and you know, these stories, you know, the stories are there, and the commentary is there, you know, and you just kind of I almost look at it. I was thinking about it today. I'm like, you know, the sets are so cheap or cheesy. And it's like, it's almost like looking sometimes at it like it's a stage play where they don't have the greatest props, right? And you know, the rocks are obviously styrofoam, but it's what are they selling? Can they sell it? You know,
it's a backdrop. It's all it is. It's a backdrop. That's those
Exactly.
Those sets became so iconic, right? I mean, I used to think that, okay, should we take this at face value, or are we supposed to imagine that this is supposed to look better? And I have to say, I dare say, I mean, there are things, the new stuff, they kind of go there. It's very glossy and more upbeat and sort of like, it's like walking into a Apple store or something. Like it's very, very, very realistic and more grounded, but I don't know. I mean, it to me, it feels foreign. It's like, I prefer because it gave the actors a chance to really, like you say, Dean, sell what this was about. It's all about them. It's all about presenting this presentation.
Selling the story,
even in the action moments, it's like looking at a view screen and there's supposed to be an alien spaceship coming at them, and they're reacting to that, and that's what sold it. It wasn't the effect; it was their reactions.
Yeah, because that wouldn't be put until later anyway. So it wasn't they had in-camera effect. Like they couldn't do any of that. You had to imagine this is what it'll look like. So, all right, Eric, let's roll into your two.
Okay, I picked probably the two of the most well known of those first 10. The one that most people regard as one of the most popular is The Naked Time, which is the first time they deal with a contagion, something that affects the crew, it affects their behavior. Everybody's sort of reacting to this thing, and it's just one of those bizarre, things that they come across, which would become a trope throughout. And it's just a wonderful example of the acting. Everybody is really, really at the top of their game here. I mean, we don't even know these people yet, barely. We're just, everybody has their little moment. George Takei is Sulu. He's running around with a foil, he's acting like Robin Hood back. This is what he's, what was a hobby has become a deep rooted fantasy come to life. The contagion is almost like alcohol on the brain. It's like people are acting out their true feelings, emotions, whatever. Spock, of course, being the most effective, where it's a bit jarring to see him sitting at a table crying. He's struggling.
He's in pain when he's crying. It's hurting him.
And again, we don't know this about him yet. I mean, it's only in the reruns that we knew what he was all about. But just imagine watching this episode first run back in the day, where we didn't know the character that well. Like, we didn't know that Vulcans were so emotionless at this point. And to have him do this, and he just, this is the introduction right here. This is it. This is what Vulcans are all about. And for him to have that sort of mental, to him, it's a disgrace. It's almost like, and he apparently, Leonard Nimoy said he got his fan mail just went through the roof because of that performance in that episode. So, yeah, I think it's great. And my second pick was The Enemy Within, which I think is a really, really formidable, just great sci-fi story. I mean, this could be a movie, with different situation. It doesn't even have to necessarily be out in space. It could be, just a freak accident or something. But the idea of separating the good and evil in somebody, and the idea of knowing that those two need each other. In this case, Captain Kirk, and this was the introduction of what would become another familiar trope, which is a piece of equipment failing on the ship, where whether it's the transporter or it's the holodeck on Next Generation, they would always write these, and it even got to the point where people thought it was lazy writing at this point because we don't have anything this week, so we'll just revert to that. But here it was really effective, and it was a really, and again,
because the stakes were high. They couldn't beam the people up that were on the planet because you didn't want them to be split.
That's right.
So it wasn't. It was broken. Hopefully, we'll fix it. It was like there's people dying potentially.
Yeah, and in both situations, there are stakes. Like even in The Naked Time, the ship is orbiting the planet, but because Riley is affected by this thing. And he's sitting in engineering. He locks all the doors, and nobody can get in. And he ends up like powering the ship down. Like the engines are turned off, and it's like probably the longest freaking 4 minutes. Your suspension of disbelief is really put to the test here, because in those 4 minutes, Kirk gets the thing. He's got his big monologue. Spock has to figure out the formula, and that and all this happens in a span.
And they got to power up the ship that takes 15 minutes to do, but you got
it takes 30 minutes. Like Scotty, that great line. He goes, I can't change the laws of physics. I have to have 30 minutes. It's such the tension there is so great.
It's a formula. It's untested. And again, you try it.
As a kid, though, you were on the edge of your seat.
High drama. Yeah.
It was fantastic. Storytelling.
And what they could do in whatever it was, 50 minutes or 45 minutes if you count commercials, whatever. Yeah. With just the characters, like you learn about Christine Chapel one of the first times you're seeing her. And you just see she's kind of got this thing for Spock, and they built on it for a few, and
it's a time travel episode, the introduction of time travel, because they had
at the very end.
Yeah, at the very end, there's so much jam packed in this 50 minutes, 55 minutes, or whatever it is. Yeah, so those are, and I like the idea of the introduction of these tropes that would follow through all the iterations of Trek down the road. So it was those are my picks, right, for that first 10
good ones.
So
and before we jump into the next set, I think it's important also for people to understand this show did not realize they were writing canon for like 7 other series 30 and 40 years later and 50 and 60 years later.
That's right. Yeah.
So, it's very easy to go back and be like, oh, well, what about this? And what about the Prime Directive? And Prime Directive didn't exist until whenever episode it got first mentioned, about non-interference. So, the fact that they were able to make this whole series, keep it mostly consistent without that knowledge, right? No one ever thought this was going to, be a cartoon, 7 years later, or whatever, then a feature film, and then we're going to make a whole other series. Forget about like keeping the original people, but let's expand it. And they had to draw upon this as the playbook for it. Mm-hmm. Which again is just amazing. There was no forethought in this. It was just another show, just like Casablanca was another movie that Warner's was making out of the 100 they would make in the 40s. This was another show that was just going to pass through. And it was already in danger after the first season. It was already in danger of being canceled. So there was
no such thing as syndication at that point either. This was one and done kind of thing.
They were living paycheck to paycheck at this this series. They were kind of hoping to get to the end of the series.
And the fans just ate everything up when they made the technical manuals, and they would look at every detail. And again, they were filming this for like low resolution, often still some black and white TVs, but most people were getting color for the first time. That's why it's all this multicolor. And now you see it on high def and you realize little details. Nobody was going to see that. It was like the first time you were going to see it, and you blink and you miss it,
Yeah.
Just going back to what we were saying about the lighting, in the high def, if you watch it on like Blu-ray, it is, you realize just how important that was for the storytelling. Because the lights would it was just so bright, and it's really effective, and it's it's just part of it, part of the whole process. So it's
just amazing. So, again, it just, you think about this little show and the impact it's had, and these guys didn't know. They had no clue.
Right. Right.
It was an acting job, which they took seriously.
Yeah.
They took, it was an acting gig, and it was a TV show. And that was a thing, and you took that, that was your career, that was your job. So you had to do your job. Mm-hmm. So, all right, let's all jump into the lift, and we're going to get into the next set of episodes. So these are episodes 11 through 20. Mm-hmm. We're each going to pick 2. So I'll go again. And in picking my second set, I did realize I have my own trope. I have my own Star Trek trope with favorite episodes. So my two favorites from the second set are the Corbomite Maneuver and Tomorrow is Yesterday.
Okay.
And in revisiting the Corbomite maneuver today, I realized that I have a trope of liking episodes where the navigator that's on the right-hand side of the console ends up having a problem. if you look at When No Man Is Gone before, right. Gary was in the right-hand, the right-hand navigator seat, and he had a break. He got zapped and he got ESP, and then
that's right.
Corbomite maneuver, Bailey has a nervous breakdown, and he's in
the Balance of Terror. You got he's a bigot, right?
Yeah.
So
Styles exactly.
So
the bad luck seat. I think
absolutely.
I think we may have uncovered another trope of like, it would eventually become Chekhov's seat, but
that's true.
Then it was cursed.
And look at all he's been through.
Throughout. Exactly. It was a cursed chair. Yeah. So anyway, Corbomite maneuver and Tomorrow Is Yesterday are the two ones I picked, and like Nick said, about one of his episodes, Tomorrow Is Yesterday is really not well known, but I really dig it because they go back to like the present time when the show was made. It was a true time travel, like Eric said with the Naked Time. They went back like 3 days in time just because of the reaction of starting up the engines. This introduced the slingshotting around the sun to do time travel. It has to do with a man that they pluck out of his jet fighter, who they think has no impact on world events. So they're not really inclined to send him back to Earth if they can get out of there. But it turns out his offspring does. So they need to now get him back there. They end up picking up another guy, beaming up a security guard. So they need to, it became like problem of the week. They needed to figure that out, so it was good. But Corbomite maneuver is probably my favorite episode of all time. I just love it.
Yeah,
it's got tension. It's got humanity with Bailey, who's an imperfect helmsman. He makes mistakes.
He's young.
He's young. He's idealistic. He questions what's going on. But then there's a game of chess that turns into a game of poker.
Yeah.
With the alien.
Yeah.
It is like a bottle episode. 99% of it takes place on the bridge, but that's where you start to see these, see them writing for the characters. Now they didn't need to put them into these situations. It's like these characters are well defined. Even McCoy on the bridge, when he's going to make his report that you overworked Bailey, I'm going to put that in my report. And anytime you want to bluff me, doctor.
Yeah, the tension.
And then,
absolute tension. Like, even Kirk like lashing out at Spock. Is that your best recommendation? It's like, because Spock just uses the chess metaphor, right? And he just and Kirk is just like, I don't have time. Like you see that this situation is getting the frustration as captain, and it's starting to like, and he's not allowed to feel these things. So you see,
there seems to be no answer. Yeah.
So I find, like you say, the humanity in that is fantastic because, people are maybe starting to notice. Even Lahora, like he lashes out at her, she yells at him. Everybody's feeling this situation, and it's a really great.
And we start to see the birth of the triumvirate.
Yeah.
Of the leadership, the swagger, the bravado of Kirk, the cold logic of Spock, and the humanity of McCoy, because you get that. I think this is the first episode where we get, I'm a doctor, not a, what do you say? I'm a doctor, not a moon shuttle command. Because he ignored the red alert.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you saw that red alert. You didn't,
Yeah, he's like, he's got the, he's kicking you're killing me. You're killing me. But that must have been quite a workout, even if it was just a cheap, probably cardboard boxes, but still,
it's just a great episode.
All
around, so well written. You get a great, payoff at the end as well. So it's just kind of really, and I love the way it ends. Actually, when they're rolling the credits at the very end we're talking the very end.
Mm-hmm.
And Kirk is and McCoy, they're walking away with Baylock and they're holding his hands, but you see them leave, and then they go around and they're in shadow as they're crossing back again. There's just something about like the way they let that linger, like the way they let that shot finish. That Baylock is going to take them around their ship and show them, and and Kirk essentially says it in the episode. This is what we're here for.
It's first contact.
When the Viserys or the little ship off the Viserys gets damaged, and he's going to go help him, and everyone's like looking like, "What are you doing? How come we're not getting out of here?" He goes, "No, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is where we show our humanity. We don't just run. This is our opportunity to prove it." So,
and it's so great that the alien presence is not malevolent. Ultimately, he was just testing them.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's one of the finest. Absolutely. Sure.
And you really get to feel who Kirk is. Here's this young, Captain Hornblower kind of character, youngest person to get command of a ship. And I think in this episode, they mentioned how Bailey was, I think, handpicked by him. So he's giving him like extra chances. Yeah. He's letting him make his mistakes, because he sees the potential in him. But you also see, like you said, the stress that Kirk has in command. He's snapping at people, but you also see the brilliance of why he got that captain seat, because the corporal might maneuver. The smirks and the looks that people give when he's doing it. Like, he's brilliant. This is like stuff that they'll be talking about for generations, literally. And,
it's a legend.
I think they called back. I think Wrath of Khan was a call back to that.
Yeah.
For some reason, like when Kirk is kind of like, Genesis, what's Genesis? And then, and then figuring out we can disable the shields on the other. Like, for me, it had the same type of thing where he's kind of, he's bluffing for time, and he's trying to figure out what
he's a great captain.
Yeah.
I
always felt
absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. And it introduces Tranya as one of the great legendary drinks in Star Trek. So.
Yep, you can get it at your local.
And we have to acknowledge little Clint Howard. Ron Howard.
He's awesome. He's so cute. He's so cute.
Yeah, I mean, it's overdubbed with with an adult voice, but this kid is. I mean, it's supposed to. I don't know if he's supposed to be a kid or if that's just how they all appear in his race, but he must be like probably, I would say, eons old. That kind of thing. One of those like. And it's so, to hear like, I am from the First Federation, whatever the hell that means, because they're part of it. And I think that's probably the first, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the first time they mentioned the Federation.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
The word Federation in Star Trek, that could,
Yeah, for a while, it's like
United Federation of Planets.
It's like they don't know what
tomorrow
it is.
is yesterday. They mentioned it as well. They mentioned a Federation because that's when Captain Christopher's like, "What Federation? What are you he's like, "Yeah, we'll explain it to you later." He's like,
"Yeah,
we'll explain it to you later." But yeah, they started to build on the again, like you said, Eric, like kind of expanding the universe with using these terms and placing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, without explaining it, you're just kind of like, oh, okay, there's like a federation of planets. Then
I also like. I have to make a comment about tomorrow's yesterday is the fact that the fish out of water thing, which would play in the opposite way in like Voyage Home, things like that, where
absolutely flip it.
It's so fun to see somebody from the 20th century, be amazed by the technology and then to see that play later on where the crew go back to like the uncivilized 20th century is just, it's delightful. And that is because it's just like humans have evolved just that much. They're still very human. They still have conflicts. And yet there is that big difference, right? Yeah. And, so that has always been a great thing. And when it comes to the time travel stuff. So
there's always been that aspiration, that Star Trek was supposed to portray an enlightened future, but not totally perfect, right? And not fantastical. There are those petty jealousies that get in the way of things, even in the future. Right. But there still is a level of enlightenment and certain things that they've moved past.
I mean, Roddenberry would when he started doing Next Gen, his mandate was no, there's no problems at all. Yeah. And it frustrated,
there goes the drama.
It frustrated the writers. They were like, "What the hell do we write about then? We can't make these people perfect.
You need conflict.
Yeah, there's going to be
conflict. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Nick.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you got
tomorrow's yesterday? I also remember I fell in love with Star Trek because my dad made me watch it as reruns. And I remember when this episode, Tomorrow's Yesterday, came on, I remember thinking, well, they got rid of Star Trek because the opening, you see jet fighters. It's, footage from like the 1960s. I'm like, where's Star Trek? So I just love that about
like
this
Air
episode.
Force, like a carrier with the planes on it. So
yeah.
Okay, what do you have for your next two?
I picked two that are very different in many ways: Galileo 7 and Arena. So Galileo 7 is like a kind of a bottle episode. This could be a stage play, but it's got such great special effects with the shuttle. They're going down. It shows Spock in command, right? And it's really testing him because the crew is kind of like fighting back. They don't like his decisions that he's making. He's trying to be logical and he's confused. He's like, I did everything logically, and yet one of my, crew just got killed. Like, it doesn't make sense. Why, and then you also see Scotty and McCoy kind of defend Spock, even though they're criticizing him too, when the other ones are kind of getting a little insubordinate. And you see Kirk trying to, because you have that other guy on the bridge who's like, leave him behind. We have to go on this mission. And, Kirk is doing everything he can to kind of save them and give them every opportunity. And I just love that. And then Arena has the Gorn, one of the greatest, in my opinion, cheesy episode, fun battles, and just a great episode again, where you've got these. In the end, you also see that the Gorn were just kind of defending their territory too. So it is Star Trek again, kind of just being like, you think you're right, you think your philosophy is the best, but looking at it from their perspective, would you do the same thing? Wouldn't you like kind of defend your territory?
There's a lesson to be learned. Yeah.
So I love it.
And that's the example of 7 has that as well, right? The beings that were on that planet were there kind of defending.
Yep.
I mean, they were a little more, primitive, but there was that element of it as well, of kind of dealing with things. And Spock was trying to understand that, right? He was trying to use his logic to outguess, the primitives on the planet, which wasn't working, and then Kirk had to become primitive to solve his problem. Right, he had to try and make a weapon, and he couldn't. He didn't have technology or logic at his hands. He had to try and outguess and make a weapon.
But it's always great that Kirk also has that knowledge of the past. His fascination with the past also comes into play here.
Books,
it's a little bit like Indiana Jones in that way. Like he's fascinated with Earth of the past. So that definitely comes into play. What's that? Something about all of these elements, and it's so funny that the alien. I used to criticize that episode because it was just so it's so convenient that all this stuff is just laid out for him.
Diamonds like just laying on that planet.
But that's intentional. That was on purpose.
Yeah.
It's so because he could figure this out. Like, so it's brilliant. It's absolutely.
And we talked earlier in the episode about suspension of disbelief with the low budgets. And I always felt like the cheesier it is, we would suspend disbelief because we love the story and and the more realistic you make it, like we've seen Gorn now in some of the other series, and they use CGI. They try to make it more realistic looking, and it just doesn't look as good or as realistic. In my opinion, the more realistic you make it, it's like
they turn the Gorn into xenomorphs. Is what they did. Is pretty much. Well, I mean,
I never had a problem with the Gorn costume. I think what sold the episode was all the exteriors, going out into the desert and being in actual cliffs. Right. And instead of trying to simulate that with like they did in the Man Trap and some of the other episodes where they're kind of making sets.
Yeah.
Bring them out to California, bring them out to the valley. Right. And shoot it in daylight. And that gave it more of I didn't care if the Gorn was in a costume because he's like walking around outside. He's not.
That's what gave it the alien aspect. That's what's
pushing the boulder over. Like he's pushing a real rock over, and it's tumbling down.
And it's just scrub brush, but the formations of the rocks. Yeah. This was the precursor to Tatooine. Pretty much for Star Wars, I think. Great performance, by the way, by Shatner. Like really, kind of like lifting that boulder. Like
I loved it.
But thing probably weighed like it was probably paper mache, but it was just. But man, he sold it. He sold it.
Yeah, I think I dare say that the scene the scene from Galaxy Quest took from Arena, where
it's been spoofed so many times.
He's got to fight the rock monster, and he's like rolling around, and they're watching the screen. They're watching it from the ship, like watching him fight, and trying to get beamed up. So again, the
influence
is far and wide.
Absolutely,
that was it. And then those are two great
picks.
Two great picks.
Yeah. I mean, it was. By the way, it was very difficult to pick.
I agree.
You know, like there's just so many. But as we do, like we don't like to overlap that much, so we kind of be a little bit cognizant of like trying to anticipate who's going to pick what, that kind of thing. Nick, I think you had some. You had mentions, but then there were some that you had like a B level, and I think I took most of your
no worries
B level
because they're all good. Even ones I didn't pick,
Nick went all the way down to engineering to get his list by the time we made our picks. So, all right, Eric, what do you have? What are your next two?
All right, I picked one that I absolutely love. It's an odd episode for sure, but when we talk about stage play, now we're getting meta right here because it's literally a play within a play. We're talking about The Conscience of the King, where this character named Kirk beams down to this planet. He knows this character and his this married couple. They have a past together. They're friends. But apparently Kirk it was a situation when he was serving on the Farragut with Riley. Riley comes back in this episode, which is nice. And apparently they were on an away mission or something where this governor of this planet was slaughtering people to save lives. Like you ultimately find out that he was doing it to save more lives than what, but they would call this guy Kodos was like the conqueror or whatever of the executioner,
Thanos.
Yeah.
That's an interesting analogy. Yeah,
and
right.
so this character ends up being in a troupe of Shakespearean actors, and he's got a daughter, and they go around and they're performing for local colonies and things like that, and very, very odd but intriguing, very sort of personal episode. And you can't say that it's a bottle episode because we do see location, like there are sets, there are things. I mean, but they really play it to that, and it's it's the first time that Shakespeare would be mentioned in Star Trek, and that would again be another familiar trope throughout. Undiscovered Country, Next Gen would. I mean, Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, Shakespearean actor, the ultimate thespian Shakespearean actor, would carry that forward. And it's just, I always thought this is what Star Trek, if Shakespeare still exists in the 23rd century at this point, then he must be great. You know what I mean? And as a kid, you realize that, this guy's still around in the future. They're still quoting, they're still performing. So it always gave Star Trek that air of, I dare say, a little bit of a highbrow nature. Like it was a little bit more sophisticated than some of the other like sort of action sci-fi things at the time.
Yeah. And that's a shame I never experienced it in the original Klingon.
I was waiting for Eric to stop talking so I could say that. I was sitting here waiting. I was waiting for him to put a period on something to say, and if you've never experienced it in its native Klingon, you're missing something.
Yeah. But that was always a thing that always stuck with me. And when you say we're picking episodes that represent Star Trek, Shakespeare is there because I feel like every actor that has appeared in Trek has been from theater. Yeah, all the major captains are theater actors. Whether it's Avery Brooks, Patrick Stewart, Catherine Janeway, Kate Mulgrew. They all came from theater. They share that experience. To me, that community, that spirit is inherent in all the shows. Yeah. And that's what makes this so engaging for me.
Yeah, and that episode is just a good old murder mystery too.
It really is. It really is.
And the twist in the end, you find out who the person did. Yeah, that's not who I expected when I first started watching that episode.
And Spock in that episode too. Like, and again, the triad of the characters coming together. McCoy, sort of coming together. Him and Spock are trying to figure this out. Spock is like very much in like in an undiscovered country. I think they kind of refer back to this episode actually, where he becomes like detective. Like he's trying to figure, like he's looking into
this guy's appearance and
that's right. Yeah.
Only a certain amount of people saw this guy alive.
He's Columbo in this episode.
No, it's a good solid mystery because you're not sure. Yeah. And even Kirk isn't sure. He's like I'm not sure. I only saw this person briefly, but I'm one of like now 2 people that are left alive that could ID this,
and his life is at stake. And
man, 20 years later,
right? And the assassin who turns out to be spoiler alert, but the daughter of Kodos or whatever, Caridian, and she just goes mad. Like at the end, she just has like a nervous breakdown, and she's quoting
like Ophelia in Hamlet.
There
right?
you go. Right?
So
it's so great. It's such a great thing.
Yeah.
So my second episode was Squire of Gothos, which I find
excellent.
It's my son Zach's favorite episode of all of Trek. I mean, it's just, again, we're dealing with like this sort of omnipotent being. Like they encounter these beings that are godlike powers, and it just, the actor William Campbell went on to say that this was one of the best things he's ever done. It was such a delightful script. Any actor would kill to play this role. And and it's the precursor. I'm fully convinced that this is Q. That this is the precursor to the character of Q, played by John Delancey in Next Generation. This was the sort of prototype. And it's just so. It's obvious, it really, the way he acts, the way he's like, so, and it turns out that he's a child, which I find, is so poignant. It seems so silly, but yet so poignant at the same time, that a child who is, again, probably millions of years old, right, is so fascinated with Earth's bloody history as a child would be. A boy, by the way. Would be so fascinated by like cowboys and Indians or playing army or whatever. He plays that to the hilt in this thing, and he's this cosmic being, and he's so fascinated by just that. And it's just and they're all trying to convey that we've moved on from that shit, and he doesn't buy, like he just. For some reason, he just doesn't buy it. Like, he's trying to, like he just wants to play. He wants to, to continue the game, as it were, and and get these guys engaged in that. And they're just not buying it. They try to escape. He makes the whole planet like chase the Enterprise.
Power that he has.
That he had. Incredible. Exactly. He just, and he's just a kid, and it's so fascinating. At the end, it's just, and so poignant. There was something so poignant about that to me.
Yeah, I think it calls back to Charlie X a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Charlie X ends the same way, where he's a boy and he escaped from these aliens that have been taking care of him, and a little bit different. Like he doesn't want to go back to that.
Right.
Whereas Trelane is just kind of getting scolded and like, almost like you left your room a mess again, Trelane. Like it's kind of like that kind of scolding for him. Whereas like, or you're playing with your army figures again. Like,
and it literally gets to that point where he's acting like a spoiled brat. He's like, I don't want to go. Like he's acting like a child. And it's just like, it's so off-putting at first, but then when you realize what it really represents, it's like, wow, yeah, it's just that kind of writing, that kind of those ideas that just made it what it was.
Yeah, when you put this, omnipotent power, and William Campbell got the chance to chew up that script and have fun, like in a good way, and have fun with it, and just kind of really. But kind of like Roger Carmel as Harry Mudd. Like there are certain characters that come along that really get the opportunity to really lay into it and make a mark and make a memorable appearance. And William Campbell did that. And then he would do it again in Trouble with Tribbles.
Yeah, he played a Klingon.
The guy was so good. They brought him back and said, let's bring him back in again. So, all right, we're in our last section. So we're going into from episodes 21 to 29. We're going to do 2 more of each. Then we'll kind of wrap it up and just kind of give you one that we think really embodies the Trek. If you were going to get somebody into it, if you're already into it, we'll give our recommendations. So my 2 are This Side of Paradise and Errand of Mercy. Errand of Mercy, I'll go through just quick. I picked it because it's the first appearance of the Klingons. The episode itself isn't that great. It is very manipulative. It's a Deus ex machina that they initiate all this stuff just to observe and just to tell them, well, we're not going to let Starfleet and the Klingons engage in a war no matter what. They thought they were fighting over this planet, but we really get to see what this episode is important for is establishing the Klingons from day one, that they're ruthless. Their violence is not a problem. Killing is not a problem. Force is not a problem. And the great thing about the episode is the monologuing that Kirk does about how, is that what you want? And here's what we're offering. And the Organians are kind of like, well, really, what's the difference? You both want to be in charge of us. So it is, it's not the strongest of episodes, but because it's the Klingons. More importantly, This Side of Paradise, to what Eric said, Contagion of the Week continues. Another episode where they lose their inhibitions. But this time they do it on a planet, and it could have, the beauty of the naked time that Eric chose in This Side of Paradise is these Contagions have them lose their inhibitions, but in different ways. The naked time was something different, was more like being drunk. This was more like assuming a different aspect of your personality. McCoy pictures himself a country doctor, and Spock. Again, another great Leonard Nimoy episode when he's able to break out of the Spock thing.
Let loose.
His love interest comes into this by the great Jill Ireland. We get to see him get affected by the spores and just have that other side, and again, very poignant for the first, he says, for the first time I was happy.
Yeah, at the very end.
Once, a great Shatner performance about his love for the ship, because he gets infected by the spores. He's the last one to leave, and we get that great scene of him fighting it, and he's like, I can't leave. And then he kind of like shakes out of it, and then Captain's log, emotions, violent emotion. He kind of like, I need to get down. I
think that would carry forward again Star Trek V, where he's the only one that's not affected by Sybok and his manipulation, and Kirk realizes that I need my pain. I am not going to let you do this to me. Like that strength of will that he has. So it's just fantastic.
Never lose you. It's that love of his ship, and it shakes him loose. So it's just a great,
it's like science fiction ideas that make you think about, when the episode's over, you're still thinking about it.
Yeah.
You're still like, well, what was so wrong with staying on that planet? Spock was happy. Why couldn't he? But the fact that there was no progress, like they say, we were here for X number of years. We accomplished nothing. And if that's a play on the 60s, almost like for a progressive show, here's a very kind of conservative message about all this drug use and everything. It's like, it's giving you pleasure, but it's also making you just sit there and do nothing. So it was really making a point, and people can disagree and they could sit back, but it's making you think, which is what good science fiction is all about.
Yeah, because when Spock shook out of it, right, he says, I don't belong anymore. I don't belong, right? I'm not a part of that quote unquote counterculture that was down on the planet, right? It's gone. I've lost it. I don't belong. So, two great episodes. Like Eric, I love it. The Contagion of the Week. We've got another trope there, and I'm chucking an episode into that pile as well with This Side of Paradise. So, Nick, what's your two?
Two of the best episodes ever: Space Seed and The City on the Edge of Forever by my favorite author, Harlan Ellison. Space Seed introduces Khan Noonien Singh, one of the greatest villains, which really reached its epic with Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan when they brought him back for that. But just great performance by Ricardo Montalban. And then you've got City on the Edge of Forever, where you introduce this Guardian of Forever. McCoy injects himself accidentally, goes crazy, beams himself down, and you've got this portal that can take you anywhere in history, right? And again, all these like kind of backstory. You just want to delve. I want to see a series just about the Guardian of Forever, but it's got Joan Collins playing Edith Keeler, and you realize that by going down there, McCoy has changed history. So the Enterprise disappears, and they have to go back and figure out what he changed and make sure it doesn't happen. And the twist, spoiler alert, Edith Keeler must die. It's like it's just so dramatic and so powerful. It's
dramatic because what's at stake here is world domination. We're talking about Nazis, the America's entry into World War. She would prevent that, but by this growing pacifist movement, and that's heavy. We're talking really heavy. Really, I mean, and we don't see it. It's just told. But it's so effective. And Spock, Leonard Nimoy, really nails it when he tells Kirk, when he says, save her, do as your heart tells you to do, and millions will die that have not died before. Those lines are chilling to the bone. That is,
her philosophy.
When she was tripping down the stairs and he's like, you could have,
right.
That could have been when she died, and you just we need to be careful with it.
The butterfly effect, little things that are going to change.
And it's such a good episode because it takes its time. Because, once they get down into the past, it kind of becomes like a whole other thing. It becomes more of a romantic drama, right, Nick? Where we learn about her preaching and running this thing for hobos and a soup kitchen.
Yeah, and speaking of hobos, there's that scene where that guy finds the phaser and kills himself, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, that could have changed history." And then you realize he was insignificant. His life meant nothing. It didn't have any impact. So the fact that it changed, who cares whether he dies here or dies of drinking? It's just deep things like that are just amazing. And DeForest Kelly's performance in this. He's had some great episodes. This one was, probably his best.
I mean, especially the end. I mean, just for the end scene.
Oh my God, it's heartbreaking.
It is high drama. They really put there was no overacting going on in that one when Edith walks out into traffic, and McCoy is going to go to stop her, to go save her, and he gets stopped by Kirk, and McCoy's like, "Do you know what you just did?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah, I do." McCoy doesn't, right? It's horrible. It's horrible because, Kirk's like, "I'm falling in love with her." And, so it's worse than just, we're just going on different plan. I have to leave now. I'm going on my ship and leaving. The stakes were much more emotional.
And Spock has to say it. Kirk can't say it. He's that when he's his fist is shaking and he's and Spock says, he knows, Doctor, he knows. Yeah, and that says everything. Again, that relationship of oh my God,
and that final line, right, where they're about to, they come back, everything's fine, and the Guardian's like, "Yeah, I can show you more adventures. Come on," and they're like, "Let's get the hell out of here."
Yeah,
and that to me was a big deal as a kid. The fact that Kirk said hell. Yeah, was that he might as well have said the F word or whatever or any other word, because to me that was a big deal.
Yeah,
because
I don't want to.
Every other time it would be go to the devil or hell was not even then it was not widely said. And again, another precursor here, another influence, Stargate.
I was going to mention Stargate before when Nick said they should make a show. I'm like, Stargate.
There you go. The Guardian of Forever is so high.
Stargate. That's why Kirk was like, "Let's get the hell out of here." Like, he doesn't want to be involved with that kind of emotional toll again. And then you got Space Seed, right? I mean, geez. Who would have thought? Again, do you think Ricardo Montalban thought in 1966 that 16 years later they're going to be calling me to reprise this character because we want to make a film?
And here's the preface of these genetically modified people who took over the earth at a certain point, and it's like they're sitting around talking about this like philosophically. They're like,
eugenics wars and
but if nobody invaded them, it would have been okay. I was kind of like, what? And they catch themselves. They're like, we know. It's like, and then that's when Khan reveals himself. Was like, we gave the world order, or whatever it was, right? That line.
Yeah, it didn't take long. It didn't take long to kind of start to have him peel away.
Yeah, but that's part of it. The motivation, the ambition that these genetically modified people have. That's the threat.
Yeah,
where they need to rule because they are
power.
The one loophole for Star Trek 2 is like he recognizes Chekhov. Right. And everybody's like, well, he wasn't in season 1, so how could he have known or met Chekhov? But I'm like, he was on the ship. And there's that scene when he's looking through all the files of the Enterprise and all this. I'm sure he saw his face on the screen, part of the crew, the manifest. And he remembers because he's easily superior.
It's plausible.
Yeah.
It's very plausible.
Get a face.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like what Gary Mitchell needed in the first, in that episode where he's skimming through. Khan is just doing it like, this is not
and then Gary Mitchell looks right at Spock on the viewer. He like turns his head when he's reading, and he's like looking right at him. That's creepy.
And then we come to find out in Strange New Worlds that Khan was actually born in Canada. Which I'm like, what? This is the face of Star Trek.
Although
today.
it's a little better than the new Trek when
doesn't matter where he came from. The threat was real.
Yeah.
And the threat was imminent. Okay, Eric, what do you got for your last two?
All right, so my last two are probably my favorite episode of at least season 1, but it may be my favorite episode of the entire series, and it's A Taste of Armageddon. I love these kinds of like episodes where they're called to the mat. The moral high ground, and what is the captain has to do something that is just not what in the vein of what they normally do in order to get out of the situation. He has to make a decision. And a decision could affect the lives of ultimately millions of people. So he took a big risk in this episode, Kirk. He decided, they tried to, this planet is in war with another neighboring planet, and they fight their war with computers, and they've been at it for like 500 years. So they kind of sanitized war in a very sort of, but people are expected to, casualties are punched up on a computer, and they have to report to a disintegration machine, and they have to, commit suicide in order to keep up the quota to preserve the civilization. And it's, it's a homogenized version of war, but it's ludicrous. It's absolutely,
it'll never end. Because there's
and Kirk is like appalled by this. He's not having it. Like, no, the Enterprise is called, and this is one of those first episodes where the Prime Directive is not effectively. It's General Order 1 is that's what it's known as in this episode. And there's this ambassador. We come to realize that over time, the Prime Directive only applies to people who are not quite there yet. Pre-warp civilizations, like they're still
you can't help them along,
right? They have to develop even further, but people who are capable of warp drive and have been out in space, like as these people are, the Federation sends this ambassador out there to negotiate with these people. The Enterprise gets caught in the situation, and unfortunately, the Enterprise is one of the casualties of the attack, of this theoretical, this attack that happens. And so they're trying to get the entire crew of the Enterprise down so that they have to kill them, to report to the, so Kirk is like, no way, this ain't going to happen, so I got to do anything I can to save my ship and my crew. And effectively what he does is bring the horror, or the idea of the horror of war, back to these people and really make them realize what war is really about. And there's no there is no homogenizing of war. It's just absolutely, no matter how you slice it, it's still, and I love the interplay between Spock and Kirk. And Spock is for the first time you realize that he is a pacifist in this. Kirk actually almost apologizes to Spock at one point, where when he tells him, he's like, things are going to get ugly here. We need more weapons if we're forced to kill. And Spock's like, I understand, Captain. So there's a little bit of that there. There's these little things, these increments of their relationship that are starting to unfold, and Spock just completely understands. And I love that line where a non-7 is like the High Council member. He's telling him, he's like, oh, there is when Spock figures it out, he says, computers, Captain, they fight their war with computers. And he's like, well, I'm glad you approve. There is a scientific logic about it. And he's like, I'm glad you approve. He's like, I do not approve. I understand. There's a big difference, so it's just one of those episodes that is so gripping. And I love the fact the way they end it is they destroy the computers. So now they're wide open for it, but now we're dealing with Cold War situations here. Like,
now you have to fight for peace instead of fighting for war.
Exactly.
You have to do everything you can to avoid war,
so the ambassador, he goes in and he's trying to, but again, a big risk. This is something that it was left wide open for somebody to come along. And it might have been done in recent years, like either in book form or comic form, where maybe things didn't go so well. And Kirk has that blood on his shoulders, like that's
can you imagine if they just keep doing another century of just really bombing each other or something?
But that is the point. That is what Roddenberry. It's the optimism of Star Trek that keeps that hope alive. And Uhura has a great line at the end where she says, "Update on the negotiations, Captain. Outlook hopeful. It's not everything's okay, tied up in a neat little bow." To me, it made it so grounded and so much more realistic in that way. Typically, situations in the show are tied up that way, and they just move on. Here, anything could happen.
Yeah. And if you think, around that time we were in the Vietnam conflict.
That's right.
And it could be an allegory for just throwing people into endless wars, right? And just kind of but bodies are commodities, and in that episode, that's what they've become. These people grow up in that society knowing that this could happen, and that's just part of the thing. Is one day you're called and you're a casualty, and you have to go. And
you made a good point, Dean, when you were like, in Errand of Mercy, he says we're soldiers, and I sometimes forget that Starfleet's like a military aspect. Like, we look at Star Trek as like optimism. That's what you were saying. It's like, and it's science and research and exploration, but they're soldiers, and I always like to think, I always also think though, sometimes it's the soldiers who know, like, we don't want to have a war.
Exactly.
We know the risks.
They're the ones that want to fight.
And we do everything we can. Sure. But when we're ready to fight, we're prered. And that's what Kirk is. Kirk is ready to.
And what makes this episode so interesting, again, is it's the crew of the Enterprise that act more of the antagonists in this episode. The people on they're used to what they're doing. They're keeping the peace by fighting this thing, and they just accept it. It's an everyday thing for them. Here, you got Scotty like saying lines like, my idea of diplomacy is a fully charged phaser bank. And so you're really getting some like really aggressive things coming out of the characters. Yeah. And it's just a whole nother side. And as you pointed out, Nick, it's very, very militaristic, and they do have the power to destroy. The Enterprise could decimate a planet. It's the Death Star.
That's what you realize.
They don't want to. Right?
And he was ready to do it.
That's right.
Scotty was like, "Oh no, you tell me to do it, I'll do it."
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Next, what was your next one? Devil in the Dark.
Devil in the Dark. Probably one of the finest examples of like an misunderstood alien culture. Like, this thing is like, it's almost like it's killing people on this mining planet. Innocent guys are getting killed. It's important to the Federation. They're producing something called Pergeum. It's like an element that powers, whatever. and this thing is like killing people, and it moves through rock, and it's like you come to realize that it's an entire civilization that is actually dead at this point, but there's a new generation being formed. And what happens is like as they're mining, they're killing the offspring,
the Horta
of this thing called the Horta, this creature, which looks like a big thing, lasagna. it's like a shaggy like thing, but it's like really kind of creepy looking, but effective. And again, the performances, Spock really sells it. This is probably one of the first introduces one of the true mind melds of him like melding with an alien mind, and him letting that emotion affect him, the pain of this creature that was mortally wounded. And because everybody wants to just kill it, but now Spock is like kind of laying it out there and saying, no, and then Kirk obviously turns around and he realizes what's happening too. So, he comes up with it like, listen, the first person that tries to kill this thing, you're dead. Don't even come, like, where Kirk was like, we need to get this Bergian moving. Like he was with and then he just kind of has a change of heart once he realizes what's at stake here.
Yeah.
An entire generation of a life form.
Yeah. And it's a very ecological minded, episode, much like the deforestation, right, of like the Amazon or whatever, and what indigenous species are you killing,
right,
not caring because you need the logs from the forest, right, and you need, and that's what these, the Horta was looked at as this we need to kill it, but you're actually making something extinct that may be able to help. They were good at digging, right, and they can help or in some way, and of course we get the I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
Yeah, McCoy performs miracles because he beams down cement, and everything's made out of rock, silicone. The idea of silicone being a life, another form of life.
Yeah,
it's like this. It's a really great scientific aspect of this episode. An introduction of that side of Trek. Respect for all life forms, that kind of thing.
Compassion,
compassion.
Like
this was actually Leonard Nimoy's, I think, favorite episode, as well as Shatner's. So it's no surprise that Nimoy would help pen Voyage Home. The whale, the conversation, and that definitely, I think this episode definitely has a play in that. So it's again. Wow. Just great, great stuff.
Yeah, they're again, all of them have something special, and it just takes a fingernail just to scratch below the surface, and it's easy to pick out some of these messages, and maybe they're not there, maybe we're ascribing them to them, but it works. It's there. And like
it's there. You don't need to scratch too far. I mean, this is like they need these resources on this planet. And there's this other life form. It's in the way. These, do the analogy with environmentalism and everything. Like there's a life form. In this case, it's an intelligent life form. No kill eye or whatever they wrote. Like they can communicate, right? And this is the last of their species, and we're killing their eggs. It's like powerful stuff. Makes you really think. Like, if it wasn't intelligent, would they have said, okay, we'll sacrifice this creature because we need this. This is something that the Federation needs.
They never stop to determine that about the Horta, right? They just like, oh, this is a dumb creature, and it's killing our people, so we got to eradicate it. And it's
what's fascinating is they realize just how fascinating this creature actually is. It's a unique life form. It moves through rock, and it moves really quickly.
Yeah, choose. So
there's a mutual understanding that comes into play.
Yeah.
The miners become rich because this thing unearths all kinds of
the Horta can go right through it.
Gems, right? And the Horta, it just exists, and that because they feed on rock. Yeah. So just that misunderstanding of cultures is everything. So that that's
again, it's just such a the messages sometimes are tragic, but there's always a positive part of it. So let's start to tie this up. So each one of us ostensibly did. We talked about 6 episodes, right? And if we're gonna pick one for somebody, if you're trying to get your friends into it, or they're just not doing it, and they have their certain attitudes or expectations about Star Trek, I would pick for somebody that's trying to get into Trek, or you're trying to get somebody into Trek. For the 6 that I did, I would pick This Side of Paradise, because it is on the lighter side. It's not Trek heavy. It might be enough to get people intrigued about, well, I thought Spock was Mr. Logic and he's doing all this other stuff. So, for the ones I picked, if I was going to tell somebody that's not into Trek, I would say, just watch This Side of Paradise and let me know, just take it for what it is, and let me know if it does anything for you. Nick, what would you, out of your 6, what would be your intro?
City on the Edge of Forever.
Perfect.
I think that's.
I was going to pick that.
I just think that's
from mine out of yours.
Yeah, it's just so relatable. You could jump right into it. You don't have to be a science fiction fan to kind of relate to the drama, and the science fiction stuff is just amazing. So it's
considered the best episode of the original series.
Anyway. And you don't need to know a lot about Trek.
Right.
And you get all the character dynamics, and who they are and what they do, and some great lines, yes, it's just great.
Cool. Eric?
I probably go with, I would like to say Armageddon, but it might be, today's day and age, people are used to the sort of heavier content. They like the drama today. So it might work for, today's audience, but I think Devil in the Dark might be the better message. So yeah, just the whole, the whole idea of cultures, just so many things could go wrong.
Yeah.
But just miscommunication. We just don't understand one another. And it just takes that little bit of patience. This actually reminds me of an episode of Next Gen, which was my favorite, is Darmok. The one where they can't communicate with this race of beings because, they just communicate in a totally different way that the universal translator can't pick up what they're doing. And so Picard figures it out because, again, patience, a student of history, that kind of thing. Love that kind of stuff.
Dedication to working through the problem instead of looking for a quick answer. And that's going to wrap up season 1. Okay, and there's 29 episodes. We've given you a decent handful between us. 6 each. That's more than half the season of interesting stuff. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's there left. Plenty of meat left on the bone for you to check out. But this was just our overview and the first of 3 celebrations for the 60th anniversary of Star Trek. So we're gonna shut the bridge down. We're gonna go into the food making machine and kind of make some chicken soup. I dip my finger into it and taste it, make sure it's real. And we will convene again in the summer on Nick's channel. So there'll be a link. We'll put a link. All around, and I'll probably just put a link in the show notes right for this episode to Nick's channel, because it'll show up regardless of when we do it. The link will be in this episode, so all you have to do is come back to this episode, and you can hit the link, and it'll be up on Nick's channel as well. So Nick Leshy, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to watch all these episodes and to digest, and we'll see episode 2. Does it hit its stride? What do we get out of it? Or are we getting the best of Trek in season 2? That episode 2 in season 2. We will find out when we reconvene. So Nick, thank you so much. We're looking forward to boarding your ship and you guiding us through season 2. And then, like I said, we're going to reconvene here later in the year, close to the actual anniversary for season 3, to continue the celebration of Star Trek TOS, also known as the original series. Any parting words for us, Nick?
Live long and prosper. Did you say that season 1? I don't know if he did, but it fits.
See how easy that is? So we're gonna leave it there. So for Nick, for Eric, this has been Dean. Live long and prosper.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.